Hi, you're watching the weekend edition of Business Plus. I'm Karthik Malhotra, and over the next 45 minutes or so, along with my senior colleague Rakesh Khar, editor, News9 Mediaverse, we'll run you through some of the most important stories that you need to end your week with. Let's go straight into what we have on the show for you today. The apple of everyone's eye, but will the threat notification shadow dull Apple's bling? Auto sales zoom, but do drivers really need to slow down? We discuss. Is the world bullish on India or bullish on its political continuity to sustain? And 1 year on, is Elon Musk regretting buying Twitter? All of this and more with Rakesh Khar and me over the next 40 minutes or so. Let's dive straight in. After several opposition leaders claimed that they received threat notifications from Apple warning them about the state-sponsored attackers, Communications and IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav ordered a probe into the matter and asked Apple to join the investigation. The centre said that the Indian cyber security watchdog CERT-In has initiated a probe and has sent a notice to the tech giant on Thursday. The centre, prior to Thursday, on Tuesday, asked Apple to join the investigation and provide information on the alleged state-sponsored attacks. Remember, even before that, on October 27th, CERT-In had warned the company's users on multiple vulnerabilities that could allow attackers to access sensitive information, execute arbitrary code, and bypass security restrictions. Rakesh, what happens from here on?
Well, the story is developing every day, and we really don't know where it's going. But the good thing is, to my mind, that the government of India has not, so to say, shied away from getting into it right in, up front. So the probe is most welcome. And the ambit of the probe, let me just try and put it in context. There is a 2022 guideline which was formulated by CERT in terms of handling with, such kind of attacks. So the broad ambit of those 2022 guidelines, if I remember correctly, is that you need to, all these complaints need to be posted at CERT 6 hours after they have happened.
Okay.
So, and the second is that if there is no FIR, then it is only a fact-finding mission.
So who files the FIR? Those who have received the threat notification?
It is incumbent upon those who have received the notification to file an FIR.
Okay.
And FIR also means, Karthik, in this case, that they have to deposit their phone.
Oh, that is tricky, isn't it?
That is tricky. And we know the Pegasus example. So the third and the most important part here is that, if there is no settlement within this particular framework, there is what we call an escalation matrix.
Right.
The escalation matrix in this case is that a group of secretaries, from an interministerial group of secretaries, will examine it.
All right.
And if it doesn't get even sorted there to a happy and healthy redressal from the consumer point of view, from the ecosystem perspective, then it goes to the court.
All right.
So that's where it is. It is, as of now, to my mind, it's a fact-finding mission. And it is incumbent upon Apple to cooperate. Now, who will raise the FIR? That's a fundamental question. The one who is having the phone and who is saying that I've got this message, he really doesn't know whether he's been tampered upon or not, but he's got this notification. So it's for him or her to take it seriously and take the next logical step if he wants the law of the land to take the next.
So let's break it down even further, Rakesh. What did Apple really say? And we got in touch with Apple and we received a reply, a very cryptic, vague, short 104-word reply that we got, 109 words if I remember correctly. The reply that we got as comment from Apple very well suggested that it cannot attribute this to any specific state. Then what is state-sponsored versus non-state-sponsored? Apple has been fairly vague in that. Now, how it defines it on the support page of Apple is that unlike a regular cyber attack, state-sponsored attackers use highly sophisticated tools. They are backed with great amount of resources and they target very, very specific few individuals multiple times over. Now, Apple is saying it cannot be specific about which state has perpetrated this attack. At the same time, Apple is also, not really ready yet to share the algorithm which triggers these threat notifications, saying that if we disclose this algorithm, it makes the attackers even smarter.
See, there are two parts to it, Karthik. I think we need to be fair to Apple from the perspective of them raising an alarm. There is a relationship between the consumer and Apple. So they have served that particular part. Now, there again, there's a view in the government, in a section of the government that, if you have provided me a service, the service has to be foolproof. And if you, as the largest technology player in the world, is not able to give me a foolproof device, then what good is it?
But is the device not foolproof because this is just a threat notification, by no means concluding that there has really been a breach? There is no way for anybody yet. In fact, cyber security expert Kanish Gaur came on a show that you were present on and
so he
said that there is no breach.
But that's not good enough from the thinking that the section of the government has. They are asking that suppose you give me a lock and I can see that someone has tampered with that lock. That means the lock is not foolproof.
Okay, sure.
So, that's another way of looking at it. I'm not saying it's the right way of looking at it. So, sending that particular communication to consumers, I think it's well within the right of Apple as to safeguard its own reputation, technologically, socially, culturally, and, in terms of the entire geoeconomic, geopolitical space, it's done the right thing.
It's but the largest company in the world.
Yeah, the communication that you're referring to, I think, that's absolutely broken. I mean, I'm being modest.
Yeah.
I think, we need to say that if you're raising the ramifications of saying it's a state-sponsored attack is so large that gravity of the situation and the charge is so intense that when you raise this charge and then you don't get into any details which are extremely important.
But Apple is saying 150 countries have received this trigger of threat notification. That means there have been state-sponsored attackers, to use Apple's language, without attribution to any specific state across 150 countries.
Apple doesn't cover itself in glory in this context. There has to be
what is at stake for Apple, Rakesh? This is Business Plus. I think, we'll perhaps get into the politics of it also. But the fact that Apple is the largest company in the world by market cap.
I'm not looking at the politics of it. I don't think it's relevant because we must look at facts. And there is a serious issue which needs to be tackled and really taken to the logical.
So my question is, what does Apple have at stake?
There's a technological context to Karthik, to my mind. Please correct me on that. We live in a borderless world, and what makes it borderless is the advent and march of technology.
Right.
The march of technology is so phenomenal, and who knows it better than Apple?
Right.
So when you're saying it's a state-sponsored attack, so in that context, you have to understand that in a borderless world led by technology, the state could be not just the state that you're living in.
Of course, it could be any state. It could be a rogue state like Pakistan, our neighbor.
I don't want to name countries, but then there is, in the last 10 years, we have witnessed.
Well, let's name countries. I mean, who has to gain the most? If it is not Indian state which has sponsored these attacks, then who has to gain? I think outside of Pakistan or China, it's difficult to find suspects.
Yeah, I mean, there have been charges of rogue states in US naming Russia as well, which is a friend of India.
Right.
So in that context, it's extremely important for Apple to understand when you deploy that word, it's a weapon.
Right.
And it has an intended consequence.
Right.
Who is responsible for the consequence if you don't define it?
Absolutely, I agree with you. But tell me, what is at stake for Apple? We know for a fact Apple has now become the largest smartphone exporter from India, looking at touching revenues of $10 billion from smartphone, domestically sold in India and exports. It is selling 49% of total smartphones produced out of India. Almost 1 in every 2 smartphones exported out of India are Apple devices. But most importantly, it is trimming down on China and going bullish on India. So I think there's a lot at stake for Apple to participate in this investigation, in this probe, and if not for the public, at least for for the investigative agencies, open up its algorithm.
Absolutely. So there are 2 players in here, the government of India, the official machinery, and the second is Apple, as a company deeply invested in India.
Right.
Over the last couple of years, we've seen how Tim Cook has been so bullish on India.
I mean, look at the celebrations, 18th April, when we had the first store at BKC opening, we had people standing in queues for hours and hours to end. And then the second store that opened in Delhi, I think the kind of grand welcome that Apple's retail stores received in India would be unprecedented, arguably.
And it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Exactly.
So in that sense, I don't see any shadow on Apple's business in India.
Okay.
And Apple must be conscious and cognizant of the fact that the timing here is extremely intriguing. I'm not raising a finger at Apple, but the timing is that it's so close to elections, and any company, forget about Apple, of that magnitude, reputation, would be happy becoming a player in the political theater called the elections in any country, leave alone India, which is a pulsating, thriving democracy. So Apple would be cognizant of that, the timing and the communication it has issued out. So, and government of India would not push it unnecessarily, like it would push any other company which is trying to raise a question mark on the democratic fiber. So the business relationship, I would like to believe, and I'm confident that that would stay and the course that it has adopted for itself.
All right. So, since you mentioned the political theatre, I think it would be relevant at this point to even look at what IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav actually said on the 31st of October when the story actually broke. You had members of opposition parties, posting on platform X. That's another story we'll in fact come to later today. But posting these threat notifications, and soon thereafter, political theatre, there was a political sort of message that came from IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav as well. Let's just listen in on what he said on 31st of October.
There are many compulsive critics in our country. Their only and only job is to criticize the government as and when they wake up, as and when they find an opportunity. You must have all seen the advisory issued by Apple. This is a vague advisory. It is based on certain estimations that they have done. Apple has already clarified that their system is, their encryption system is of highest possible order. They've also clarified and issued a statement saying that this kind of advisory has been issued in 150 countries.
So, 2-3 messages coming out from what Minister Ashwini Vaishnav said. Number one, he's saying opposition leaving no stone unturned. I'm just paraphrasing it. He didn't say that. Leaving no stone unturned to make any issue a political issue. Opposition, of course, Rahul Gandhi said a completely different thing. He said that, deceit tactics and diversion tactics are used by the BJP as well. Again, paraphrasing him. Now, the second thing he's saying is that threat notification in 150 countries, which we've already discussed. And third, saying that Apple has certified that its technology is foolproof. Now, the simple point, since you mentioned political theatre and we just heard, Minister Ashwini Vaishnav also mentioning the opposition's charges against the government. The fact that the select few individuals who received this threat notification, not one of them is part of the sitting government in the centre. So, when we talk about the context of targeting individuals through these threat notifications that Apple says, then why are only opposition members being targeted in addition to few, policy watchdogs and think tanks as well as journalists?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think like Apple's communication is not perfect. It's far too imperfect in that sense. Yeah. I would also take the liberty of saying Ashwini Vaishnav, for all his brightness, linking the two together, brings Apple into the foray of the political theatre.
Right.
So I know he should have, I would have expected that the communication from the government was that criticizing Modi and Apple's particular charge, they are two delinked, activities.
Right.
And even if the profile of people who have been targeted has a certain trajectory.
Right.
And on that again, Apple needs to tell us the algorithm why and how he knows. So Apple knows exactly who all have that kind of a phone.
Right.
And where is the mathematics behind that algorithm reaching out to only select individuals?
Right. So algorithm continuing to be in question, the fact that even if Apple is unable to publicly disclose the logic behind that algorithm, it is absolutely imperative for at least the investigative agencies to look at that algorithm, look at the logic behind that algorithm and decrypt, demystify, decode it for the common user and draw some sort of a conclusion to the story, which I believe is going to have lasting consequences on use of technology, on cyber security in India and across the world.
On the intersection of policy, security, technology, governance, democracy.
Absolutely.
That's the cusp. It's
Absolutely.
a huge cusp.
It's a huge cusp, says Rakesh Khar, but let's move on. I think from Apple, let's move on to something else which is fairly relevant to all of us Indians, those who are aspirational, those who love to take our beautiful cars out for a spin, either for work or for pleasure. Auto sales continue to zoom. Look at the data any way you like, month on month, quarter on quarter, year on year. There's nothing stopping India's Zoomers and their aspirations for ditching the shared mobility and embracing owned mobility. The one big headline for the last 2 years or so is India's love with SUVs. Now, don't get us wrong here. The official definition of SUV is quite specific, and most so-called compact SUVs, mini SUVs, or just UVs, utility vehicles, are not real SUVs, but the category of sporty-looking, if I may call it sporty-looking, tall utility vehicles has only been growing. But as India takes pride in its growing number of car ownership numbers, there is something that we perhaps should not be very proud of, right, Rakesh? Let's look at the data. What is it that India should not be proud of? We're actually talking about overspeeding. Overspeeding is the biggest killer on Indian roads. Overspeeding accounted for over 70% of accidents as well as deaths on Indian roads. Most accidents, very surprisingly, have taken place on straight roads, not on curved roads, not on pothole-ridden bumpy roads. Hit from the back collisions are more common than head-on collisions, 21% over 17% or so. Most accidents, surprisingly again, Rakesh, happen during the day and not at night. And most tragically, two-wheelers account for maximum number of accidents as well as deaths. Very contrasting set of emotions here, Rakesh, if nothing else. Number one, you're looking at a great boom in auto sales, and at the same time you're tragically looking at a great boom in the number of accidents and deaths emerging from road crashes. The numbers are staggering. About 4,34,35,000 accidents or road crashes, however you may want to define it, in the calendar year 2022. Big numbers there.
I'm quite, I must compliment you for picking this story. It's not a traditional business story. It's at the cusp, and that's the cusp that India has to navigate. There are a lot of, very, very sensitive and gray areas which we need to navigate very carefully. At one end, we have this huge consumption story, which is driving the Indian economic growth story. Then there is the, the cultural and the social context, how we drive. SUVs, unfortunately, could be now, so to say, substituted with speed utility vehicles. We may not be happy with the definition, but we have seen that speed is one killer. And largely, if you look at, the fatality rate, we got so worried with COVID, which really shook us, and not just us, it shook the entire nation. If you look at the number of deaths in COVID and the number of deaths that we have every year on roads in across big metro cities. And the other worrying part, which you pointed out, is that most of these deaths are happening on big metros, on roads during the day, and involving these big ticket cars and two-wheelers.
So what is it that can be done, Rakesh? I think we've all seen enough and more posters, banners, speed thrills but kills, better to reach late and rather than not reach at all. We've seen enough sort of nudges, if I can call it, from the side of the government, state government, central governments, to tell people to drive slow. I think enough number of enforcements have also happened when it comes to mandatory airbags in cars, seat belt. I think even on highways for those sitting at the back, passengers sitting at the back, mandatory seat belt. We've seen auto companies also innovate with technology, ADAS. You drive a car that has that latest technology. I bought my car last year which does not have ADAS, ADAS. So what is it? Who needs to do what to ensure that these accidents or crashes and deaths emanating from there, become history?
It's the ecosystem problem. I think at the front of this entire challenge is the law enforcement agencies.
Okay.
The fear of law. You brought in,
Absolutely.
The fear of law is the key challenge. I was having a chat with Maruti chairman R.C. Bhargav a few months ago, and he pointed to this large fact about, need to have many airbags or 6 airbags for each car, and the cost imperative versus, the safety quotient. So they've done an independent study. According to him, and he's coming on record on that, about 60% of deaths have happened when the driver has not worn a seat belt. Now, whose responsibility apart from the driver? There's a social context to it, and driver doesn't mean just an employed driver. It means the guy who's owning the car, who is supposed to be literate and has the money to buy that car and is happily driving it, and also is reflective of the aspirational class of this country.
But Rakesh, just in defense of the auto sector, some of it has been nudged by the government. Some of that is also voluntary. If you look at the fact that if you don't clip your seatbelt, there's a continuous beep that keeps disturbing the driver. I think it is absolutely imperative for somebody to to take notice of that beeping signal and wear the seatbelt.
Yeah.
It becomes inconvenient to drive without the
I
seatbelt,
would
if
say
you
the
ask
auto
me.
sector, the PV segment, passenger vehicle segment,
Yeah.
has done incremental work on this.
Exactly.
Now, new
Mandatory
cars-
airbag, 6 airbags,
no, and also the
seatbelt warning,
beeps beyond
at 80 kilometers
that's right.
per hour,
But
continuous
somehow
beeps at
we
120
continue
kilometers
to
an
ignore
hour.
it. We get this thrill, the speed. I think the speed has got something to do with our psyche. We feel, unduly empowered driving that car without the consequences of hitting someone on the road. And then the tragic part is that we behave like parasites. We just look at people, someone dying on the road, take his videos, put it on social media.
And steal his mobile phone, steal his laptop and walk away from the scene.
In the latest case of this young filmmaker who was,
in South Delhi.
In South Delhi, people took away his phone and his father was trying to reach him desperately. They cut the cord and they threw the SIM card away. So I think the social milieu, the cultural context, the societal context. See, society doesn't have a homogeneous nature to it. So I'm not saying everybody is good or bad. We have our own role to play. But any aspirational class in this country, if you have to keep track of the growth must include this particular training at the societal level about what you're going to do.
But Rakesh, you're talking about a utopic world here. I think cultural sort of sensitivity and the fact that you want to take social responsibility at an individual level is very difficult to percolate. I want to pick up on the point you made earlier, which is enforcement of the law. We are sitting in the year 2023, coming to the end of 2023. 75 years of India's independence, number of cars being sold, the rate at which roads and highways are being built, infrastructure push, all that is great. Why are we unable to enforce and penalize, heavily penalize those who are flouting the laws?
Again, it's linked to dependency in courts. I mean, our courts are saddled with lakhs and lakhs of cases. You do a challan and you don't pay the fine there. It goes to the court. Your license is impounded. You still carry on till you're caught again.
Because finding another license,
Is
real
again.
or fake, is simple. So
I know.
I think it has to be done at every level. It cannot just be pendency at courts. Access to license, getting a license to drive, or in this case a license to crash or a license to kill, can be done for 1,000 rupees in Delhi's Sheikh Sarai RTO.
No, I would
just
say,
as an example.
Karthik,
I'm sure RTOs across the board.
RTOs in Delhi. There's, to be fair to Delhi government, I'm talking about Delhi. I don't know about others, neighboring areas in UP and say in, other areas in this country which are not that well governed in that sense. There's been a massive improvement in terms of both the pilferage, in terms of the brokers coming in and giving you a license. The test itself has become so difficult. I mean,
but how many people actually enroll in a driving school, Rakesh, and pass that test? So at some level, even at Indian schools, should it not become perhaps a mandatory subject like it happens in the West?
That's what I'm saying.
I have cousins who've lived in the US, in other Western countries, where at the age of 16, they enroll for the driving test at the school level itself.
So that's the societal quotient I'm talking about. You need to tell your children that when you're driving a car, don't be overjoyed by the fact that you got empowered. You have a huge responsibility. With that empowerment comes an enormous responsibility. We don't realize it. We don't tell our people that, you will tell him or her that, be safe. But be safe means that you have to ensure that someone else is
also needs to be safe.
Absolutely, yeah.
True. Right, so I think endless debate there, Rakesh, but...
There's a socio-economic perspective also to it, Karthik. See, we've essentially been a savings economy. Over the last 10 years, and more so, post-liberalization, now the trajectory in the last 10 years minus the COVID period has been accentuated for, moving from a savings economy to a debt economy.
Right.
Now, the impulse to buy a SUV, you saw the surge in SUVs is led by luxury cars.
Right.
So, it's fair and legitimate for someone young and bright to have a luxury car.
Despite the high interest rates, we are in a high interest rate cycle.
We are in a high interest rate cycle.
Incurring debt at a high 9%, 10%
for that
car
empowerment,
loan.
For that empowerment at one level is fair. But for instance, if we have another, devil like COVID coming in our lives, imagine what will happen to that cycle of refilling that, that loan. And it will have an impact on that individual, it will have an impact on that asset, it will become a liability, and most importantly, it will have an impact on the bank which has given the loan.
And the insurance companies.
And the insurance company. So, there's a socio-economic perspective to it. Somewhere down the line, as part of the school training and, at home telling people to be cautious and responsible, we also need to see little more merit in the savings economy.
Right, savings economy. Well, I'm not sure if the Zoomers are going to agree with Rakesh Khar or not. I'm a little closer to his age and Gen X, so to speak. So I think I'll agree with that.
Separated by 2 decades.
we'll not disclose our ages respectively. Well, I'm 20, he's 40.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes.
So let's move on to something else, which not Indians as much, Indians also perhaps, but global emerging market sort of experts, equity investors are very bullish on. What are they bullish on? It seems they're very bullish on India, but are they bullish on India alone? Well, let's give you a few examples. So, veteran emerging market investor Mark Mobius has called India a safe haven for investors. Now, his optimism, however, has got two elements to it. One element, of course, which should not and would not likely be changed in decades to come is India's young demographic. And the other, which could perhaps change, is his confidence in a stable government going forward. Now, Mobius expects India's benchmark index Sensex. What is the Sensex? Sensex, of course, is the index that houses the top 30 largest companies in India in weighted ratios of their market capitalization. Mark Mobius expects Sensex to touch the 1 lakh figure in the next 5 years. Remember, this week ended with Sensex in the range of about 64,400 levels or so. So he's seeing an upside of about 55% or so in the benchmark Sensex index over the next 5 years, if and only if, he says, the BJP government comes back to power in 2024. Let's contrast this. Contrast this with what Jeffries is saying. Chris Wood, another equity market expert, says that Indian equities could see a correction or a decline of about 25% if the BJP loses in 2024. Rakesh, bullish on India or bullish on Modi? What is the sentiment behind these big powerhouses, investment houses, really, when they look at India?
Well, I mean, there are 2-3 ways of looking at it. One is that politics of stock markets is a global phenomenon now. More and more risk management companies are looking at linking the rise of markets or the fall of markets with the political stability or political instability in this case. So I think, having said that, Mark Mobius and Chris Woods, my apology, are both essentially very bullish on India. If you look at their prescriptions for the emerging markets, they have been maintaining that India will do well, and India has done well phenomenally, especially when it comes to the markets. Now there is a nuanced difference. If you ask me, it's not even BJP. It is Modi.
Yeah, that's not my question. Are they bullish on India? Are they bullish on Modi? I think they've not just said Modi in their statement. They said BJP. But we know what they imply.
It narrows down to that. And it's not without reason. See, the way Modi has transformed himself from, a chief minister of Gujarat. Gujarat traditionally was, a well-to-do state, but the way he has accentuated the GDP growth, brought in investment into that, with that vibrant Gujarat, which has become a global template now.
Yeah.
All states are following that template.
Yeah.
Early on when he was the chief minister in the first term, for whatever reasons, he thought about bringing in businesses, to come and,
the vibrant Gujarat summit.
That's what it's become a global template.
Of course.
And the Tata, example post Singur.
Yes.
So there are established, proof of idea that Modi has demonstrated as chief minister and now as, country's prime minister. So in that sense, betting on him, on his policy reforms, though personally I feel as a journalist, I would have expected him to do much more, which if you have a conversation with either of these two gentlemen, they'll point to that: land reforms, labor reforms, making bureaucracy a little more accountable, bottoms up, governance, empowering the district magistrate, calling him a CEO, as Vedanta chairman has been rightly talking about, making the district magistrate the CEO. From a business perspective, the business guy feels far more assured.
Right.
And then the Federal India story, where the state and the center play in harmony rather than in competition and collaborate wherever it's required. I think this, may not be taken politically well when, when one of the gentlemen is saying that, it will lose 25% if BJP or Modi doesn't come to power.
Just to complete what he said, and maybe we should put that entire quote of Chris Wood up on the screen so that we are not paraphrasing something out of context. What he's really saying is that initially the markets will see a 25% correction, a 25% decline, and therein, at lower valuations, people would start buying into Indian equities again. But the immediate impact, the sentimental impact, as we call it, of elections on markets is first going to be this momentum to sell to a point that it comes down 25%, and then the buying will begin.
I take you back to 2004 when Manmohan Singh became the Prime Minister with the support of left.
Yeah.
The very entry of left really, created a
That's
sense
exactly
of,
what Chris Wood is also saying.
Yeah.
He's comparing it with the 2004 outcome, where he called it a surprise
yeah.
election outcome, and that's exactly what he's
yeah.
saying. So, go
So
ahead.
then again, when Chidambaram, who drew who so to say built the dream budget in 1997,
Yeah.
During his tenure as finance minister, we had the massive crash. From 21,800, we came down to about 7,800.
That's
if
right.
I remember the figures.
2008, you're talking about the
2008,
Lehman Brothers
that's right.
subprime crisis in the US that trickled down to India as well.
21,800 to so,
Yeah, September 2008, if memory serves me right.
Yeah. So in that sense, Manmohan Singh, one of the best known minds in the business and economic world globally, and the left entry. Having said that, their concern might be right. So is it a question of market correction? One needs to go a little nuanced. Right. Is there a genuine market correction? Are Indian markets overinflated? Or is it the sentiment that will kill the market?
Right. So I don't think either of them are really talking about the Indian markets getting killed. They are not really looking at a doomsday scenario. They're saying that the sentimental impact, perhaps, if I can paraphrase, is going to be that market will see a selling up to a point that markets come down by about 25%, and thereafter the buying at lower valuations will begin again.
So both of them have become part of the political theatre. But the good thing, I think it's important to point out to them as well, as a student of Indian story for the last 35 years, I would say that the best part about Indian story now is that there is, by and large, political consensus on economic reforms. Okay. And the broad trajectory, even with Rahul Gandhi's, at times, so to say, slightly dissenting note on how the business needs to be proceed with a focus on particular couple of business houses, his own governments in various states are doing business with those particular entities.
Right.
Because it is the need of the hour. Wealth creators have to be welcome.
Right.
Only when you have wealth creators that you will have a generation of people getting into the economic zone and improving their per capita income.
Absolutely.
So that consensus is the savior.
Absolutely. We'll just spend another minute or so on this, and I want to touch upon something else, because we are talking about this bullish sentiment on India, the bullish sentiment on Narendra Modi-led BJP government returning to power and the upside in the markets. But what we haven't seen up until now, for the last almost 4.5 years, ever since before the start of the pandemic, 2019 onwards, when we actually saw GDP numbers, going down, still rising, but not at the same clip at which they were rising earlier, we've seen that corporate India is still holding back on what we refer to as the animal spirits. The heavy lifting for GDP growth is still done by government spending. And on one side, we have government spending on infrastructure, capital expenses. On the other side, we have this boom in consumption. But another very important factor which can drive the GDP growth to the number that we want to take it to. Remember, we are looking at almost 8.7% annualized CAGR growth to become a developed economy, $30 trillion economy by 100 years of independence, 2047. So we are yet to see, for the last 4.5 years, the animal spirits of corporate India getting unleashed. Are they also waiting for a definitive tick mark on political stability? And do you see that?
No, I would be very upfront and stick my neck out. I think, I would count it as a relative failure for this current government. With these kind of numbers, if you have not have been able to drive corporates to really put their worth on the table.
But it will be difficult for corporates to do that because we are in the high interest rate cycle.
This government gave them corporate tax cut.
Yeah, 25%.
And which is not, where again they've been accused of being pro-businesses.
Yeah.
So having done that, there should have been a quid pro quo, which is in the interest of the nation.
But
which has not
cost
happened.
of capital is going to continue to be a challenge for corporate India.
If you wait for cost of capital to, fall to a level where it's your comfort zone, you have to take that risk. You have to bite the bullet. To my mind, corporate India has not yet fully played to the game that is expected of it, not just by the Modi government, by an average Indian citizen. If it does not do heavy lifting, you're right, Government of India has a certain limitation. It has the fiscal deficit sword on in its neck. So on its neck, so it can't beyond a point keep spending. There is a pressure there also, and states are already overspending than populist schemes. So I think corporate India has to fire. And Modi government, I don't know whether these two gentlemen have looked at this particular perspective, should have been able to nudge them to do better. There have been statements from the finance minister, the prime minister, more so from the finance minister, including Piyush Goyal, the commerce minister, nudging them, but it's just a nudge which has not yet worked. But just to give a little bit context on the earlier conversation on this particular story, see, I feel that traditionally Congress leadership has been averse to identify itself or its political alignment from the economic perspective with Sensex.
Right.
So Manmohan Singh, you remember the very famous statement, "I don't lose sleep over the way Sensex behaves."
True.
And Chidambaram even did that. He also, so to say, maintained a distance. And interestingly, I did a piece a few years ago, I think about 4 years ago, on politics of Sensex, where I could see that whenever the market, it takes a massive hit, Rahul Gandhi, who is the representative opposition leader today, he is in the front foot and says that, it shows the failure of the government. But when the Sensex is touching new heights every day, there is a strategic silence.
So my limited experience as compared to yours, Rakesh, tells me anecdotal evidence that BJP government in power, markets see an upside. Congress government in power, real estate sees an upside. And I'm not thinking about Robert Vadra here. Let's move on. Let's move on from the shores of India to shores beyond India and put the focus really on maverick entrepreneur Elon Musk. What has he been up to? Well, ever since he became boss of Twitter, or X as it is called now, it's been just a little over a year. In October 2022, Elon Musk bought Twitter for a cool $44 billion. 1 year on, X, the rebranded Twitter called X, is valued at $19 billion. But valuation is perhaps not the only regret that Elon Musk would nurse right now. The Israel-Hamas war has shown how X has become the preferred platform for disinformation. This when Twitter, when it was bought by Elon Musk, was slated to be transformed into a platform that bears the flag of free speech. Why? Why did this happen? Well, for one, because Elon Musk, to begin with, fired the entire fact-check team at Twitter. Then he made the blue tick available for sale. The blue tick was, of course, this badge of authenticity, verification. Somebody who has a blue tick is a subject matter expert. That blue tick became available for sale for anybody who had about $8 to spare, could become an authenticated voice and reach to more and more people. And more arguably, many other ill-informed decisions that seem to have done the platform more harm than good. Rakesh, an albatross around Elon Musk's neck, if that blue little logo over there was, to be reimagined in a 3D sort of a perspective, would you see that blue birdie logo shaped like an albatross hanging around Elon Musk's neck, a burden that he perhaps no longer would want to bear?
I mean, Elon Musk is one character who you call a maverick, and normally we associate mavericks with some amount of genius. Obviously, he has his own strengths, but his Twitter story.
I mean, to be fair to the man, PayPal,
yeah, I know,
Tesla, but he has had his share of success as well.
Yeah, and I probably, he won.
And the richest man alive.
Alive. But Twitter has been a case down the hill, there's no doubt about that, the way he has managed Twitter. So when you assume too many roles in one, he's the promoter-in-chief, he's the CEO-in-chief, he's the editor-in-chief.
Linda Yaccarino got appointed as CEO, an FMCG behemoth and ad agency experienced woman leader to come and shore up revenues at Twitter. Revenues, I mean, advertisers have pretty much fled the platform faster than that logo got changed, the board logo got changed.
Absolutely. And look at the way he's, when I said editor-in-chief, because he's putting premium on disinformation.
Okay.
He thinks he has a right to speak wherever and everywhere. And on the contrary, Twitter, which was hugely, respected for its diversity of opinion, that's where it started. Yeah. You would know that many big influencers globally, including our Prime Minister, I think Twitter was one of his earlier port of calls, and some very eminent journalists, thinkers were on Twitter. Now you take it out, a blue tick, and then, substitute it with a paid tick without getting into your identity and your credentials. So, right credentials have been replaced by probably wrong credentials at a price.
Yeah.
And then, having said that, even then the revenues are not looking anywhere in sight.
Absolutely. So do you think the Israel-Hamas conflict, ongoing conflict, unlikely to end anytime soon, has sort of been the litmus test for these shenanigans of Elon Musk, if I may, where the decisions that he has taken, getting rid of the fact-checking team, sacking pretty much 70% of the employees, shutting down offices after offices, walking into office with that wash basin and, I remember those visuals. And overall, just this whole context of making people reach more and more audiences by paying for the blue tick have been, in one word, a failure?
I would say as of now, it looks like a dismal failure. He's not been able to maintain the hygiene that Twitter represented. And on the contrary, it's got into one controversy, into another, and then the revenues are falling. I don't know if you're a Twitter employee today, many of whom, lost jobs, but if
Yep.
you still have survived
Yep.
the onslaught with that wash basin syndrome, so I don't know how you're feeling about it. You have an uncertain future, and if I may do a play on the word X, it soon looks like it'll be like an X.
EX instead of X.
Absolutely.
Elon's X will be EX. Well,
EX.
that's interesting, Rakesh. But where does Twitter go from here? I mean, Elon Musk took charge with these mammoth ambitions of transforming Twitter into a super app and everything app. We haven't seen super apps outside of China, I've been told. I mean, I haven't been able to experience those super sort of apps here in India because they're owned and operated in China. But is a super app really something that anybody right now should go after? Are we living in an age where we want one app to do everything? And is that going to be a viable solution for anybody? Whether even Indian domestic companies like Paytm or Tata Neu trying to build those, looking at the failures of Elon Musk over the last 1 year, would super app really be a thing to gun for?
I don't know. I mean, I'm, as a student of communication and democracy, I think anyone who is enshrined in democracy would be averse to anything omnibus.
Right.
Anything omnibus is threatening to the very fact of having a choice.
Right.
If you have one umbrella serving you all the comfort and the convenience apart, you want to experiment with choice. You need to know exactly what's happening in other platforms. So that's given rise to many other platforms beyond Twitter, formerly X.
So choice is what Rakesh Khar is talking to you about, and choice is something that we offer here on News 9 Live. Well, sample a lot more of our content here on News 9 Live as well as on our OTT, the world's first news OTT app, News 9 Plus. And that's all from Rakesh and me on this weekend edition of Business Plus. Thank you so much for tuning in, but don't go anywhere. After this short documentary on News 9 Plus, which we air for you here on News 9 Live, keep continuing your experience watching shows from all other genres of news here on News 9 Live. For me, for this weekend, it's goodbye. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, Karthik.
Thank you, sir.